And I think we're live. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, good morning, good morning. We're live. So first of all, this morning, we'll start by saying good morning to Grey Eagle, who, as most of you will know, is standing to my, excuse me, I've got a nitty nose, to my right side. I scratched my chin earlier on. I was thinking, you know how when you're thinking you sort of have this little scratch and think, I've got this big blobby red mark on my chin. Anyway, good morning to Grey Eagle. And Cachorro is in the corner this morning. You know, will he come out fighting today, or will he stay in the corner? I have a feeling he's going to stay in the corner. He had his little sort of round of, you know, happy and good morning and all that stuff, and his tail's wagging and so on, and then he puts himself in the corner, and that's it for the next few hours. And of course, we also have remotely, we have Chris. Say good morning, Chris.
Good morning, everyone.
And Chris is going to be helping me. She's going to be scrolling through your questions, your comments, and all of that. And we're hoping that we're going to have lots and lots of them. So we shall see. So yes, it is story time, and I am going to tell you the story. In order to tell you this particular story, I'm going to take you to Arizona. But before I take you to Arizona, I do want to just chat, give people a chance to get on, those people who are sort of missed it or not quite there yet and not yet clicked on the button to hear this story time. So I'm going to tell you what I am going to do. What am I going to do for the rest of the day? This afternoon, well, actually this morning, once I finish this show, I'm actually going to take out a rack of lamb, which I have prepared, ready, almost. I'm going to get my big fat jar of fresh pesto that I made a few days ago. And I'm going to make some fresh breadcrumbs. And yes, you've got it. I'm going to make a rack of lamb. And I'm going to coat it with pesto. And then let it cool for a little bit, and then around 3:30 this afternoon I'm going to cut it into pieces, as you do, and wrap it all up. What am I going to do with it then? I'm taking it to the beach. Oh, my friend Marilu and I, we're going to go to the beach this afternoon, and we're not going to go until around 3:30. And we're going to take our chairs and we're going to have our dinner on the beach and watch the sunset. So I might just send you some photos. Would you like to join me? If you want to join me on the beach, I shall be on Boca Beach, Boca Grande. It's beautiful there, especially if the sun is shining. It looks like the sun is going to be shining today. I don't think the forecast for rain. Chris, do you wish you were coming with me?
Absolutely.
Would you eat the lamb,
though? Oh my gosh,
though?
I'm so envious.
Would you eat the lamb?
I would skip the lamb. I'd be in the water, though.
Well, let me see. If I made, what would you eat? You would eat fish. If I took some fish along, you'd eat the fish, right?
I love your fish.
And what else would you eat if I took it along?
Well, your chicken sandwich that you make up all the time. That's really nice on the beach.
Yeah, that's good too. But anyway, we're taking rack of lamb, and it happens to be one of my favorites, and it's also one of my signature dishes. All right, so that's that. So what did I say we'd talk about this morning? What story oh yes, I know what it is. Right, Arizona. Let me do a little bit of background for you first before I begin my story. There in Phoenix, or just outside of Phoenix, Arizona. I don't know if any of you have ever been to Phoenix, but it is an amazing place. It's one of those places that as you're driving into it, your jaw is somewhere on your somewhere down here. You literally your jaw drops, because there are these enormous, ginormous, massive, great rocks that seem to rise up out of the ground, red rocks that rise up, and as you're driving through, there are some over there, or wait a minute, there's some over there, and there's, and on it goes. And Arizona is a lot like that, but Phoenix in particular is just astounding for its red rocks and so on. But there is also something that appeals to me. And of course, this story is sort of very much for my spirit guide, Gregor, who we did say hello to this morning, because this is where the Apache were a nomad tribe, I should say nation really. They were nomads. They would travel all over the place, but Phoenix seemed to hold certainly for Gregor, seems to hold a special place. And just outside of Phoenix, there's a place which is called the Apache Trail. And when I first went there with a friend of mine, the very first time I ever went there, we rented, well, actually it wasn't the first time I went there, I shouldn't say that, it was actually the second time I went there. We rented a Mustang, top down. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Thelma and Louise. We were like Thelma and Louise, top down, driving along and driving through the Apache Trail. Now, for probably the last 20 years, man has ruined the Apache Trail, ruined absolutely, as unfortunately we do. It is now all commercialized. There are these places along the way that you can stop at, beautiful inns and so on. There are lakes that people swim in, and they've made it they've also widened the trail, sort of literally chipped into the rock and widened the trail, and it's really, it has become a resort, very commercial. And the last time I drove the Apache Trail, I was passing, what do you call those big things, Winnebagos and like that, you know, campers and people with huge vehicles and water skis and jet skis on the back of their vehicles, and you know, heading to some of the lakes that you can find along the Apache Trail. And I do get it. I do get that it's a fabulous place, and I do get that people want to make the most of it. But really, did you really, really, really have to go and ruin it? Because that's what, I don't know who they are, but that's what they've done over the years. When I first went on the Apache Trail, it was this very dangerous. Yes, I know, I like it that way. Sort of just the road was, it was sort of like you had to ride around. The cliff face was there, right, you know, next to you. So, you know, if you sort of swerve, you couldn't really swerve very much. There were places along the trail that there was room for two vehicles, providing they weren't so big. But, you know, one of you had to hug into this little piece and keep your fingers crossed that the other person's wheels didn't go over the edge of the cliff. But it was real. It was as it used to be. It was authentic and as it used to be. And there is a place there. I don't even want to know what they did with it now, but there was a place when I very first went there, and you had to search for these things, and you had to sort of drive down the roads, and there were rocks falling. Very often you'd get a little rock slide here and there, and sometimes you were driving along and you'd get a rock slide in front of the car. So you had to be, you know, careful. But the views are astounding. There's a river, a green river that runs all the way through it. The views are incredible, and you could sort of visualize, you know, the Native Americans riding their ponies through there, and there were places not commercialized, but there were sort of these dirt tracks that if you went off to the side, sometimes you come across a dirt track and you drive down this dirt track. You didn't even know if you'd be able to get back up again, but come on, it's an adventure. So drive down the dirt track, and there was the Apache Lake, so my friend and I, Thelma and Louise, we actually got out of the car. My friend was screaming as I was driving down this steep incline to get to the lake. She was screaming and saying, "How are we going to get back? How are we going to get back?" But I remember I had Gregor with me who would say, "Yeah, you can go down there and you'll get back up. You'll be fine." And he was guiding me every step of the way. And sure enough, we did get back up and we didn't have any problems. And you sort of, at the end of the trail, you go all the way to the end of the trail. There's this very famous dam. I can't remember the name of it now, but anyway, there's a huge dam at the very end. But this whole trail is where the Apache, they used, which is why it's called the Apache Trail, they used it to go back and forth between different areas and different places. And it was, yes, was it dangerous to drive? Yes. But if you've ever driven through the Swiss Alps or the French Alps, my goodness, it's worth it. I mean, it's scary, really scary, but it's worth it. You do have to have nerves of steel when you're driving in these places. But as I've said, unfortunately, they've chipped away the Apache Trail and, made it something completely different than it used to be. When I first went there, the beginning of the Apache Trail, there was this just on the edge, just at the beginning of the trail, there was what do you call it, a trading post. And I remember going in there, and there was this guy, the whole place was filthy. He had a counter which was really funny, really, because it was all glass. So you could look in, and he had all this beautiful jewelry, silver and turquoise and all sorts of things he had, and everywhere in the shop it was filled with sort of artifacts of one kind or another. And the natives used to make jewelry, and they used to make different things and take them to the trading post for them to sell. But when you looked into the glass cabinet at all the jewelry, every little bit of silver was black. It was black and more black. And if you saw something that you think you might have liked, the guy would say, do you want me to clean it up, let you have a look at it? And he'd take it out the back, and then he'd come back with this shiny thing that looked gorgeous and fabulous. And I bought a few things from him. But we would always, every time I went on the Apache Trail, which was quite a lot, we'd always stop in there. Unfortunately, though, do you call it progress? I'm not sure you call it progress, but anyway, people call it progress. As they started to develop the Apache Trail and make it more commercialized, I'd go into the trading post, still the same old guy there, but he had an assistant now, and you'd look into this glass counter, which, I mean, remember, it was like, somebody's trying to call me. It was this glass counter, and you look into it, and when, and you couldn't, I mean, the glass counter itself was filthy. You could barely see the top, and he'd get his elbow and rub the elbow across the top so you could peer in to see what was in there. But as progress happens, the last time I went in there was not one dirty piece of jewelry. It was so sad. The countertop was shining, and everything, every piece of jewelry in it was shiny and bright, and all the silver was polished, and it was really, really sad. But anyway, it's called progress. So there's this amazing place, and I'm sure that you can book your vacations there anytime you feel like it. But as I said, the first few times that I went and drove down the Apache Trail, I was very fortunate in that it was just as it used to be. But as you're driving, and you're driving out, you're coming out of Phoenix, and before you actually get to the Apache Trail, there's a range of mountains which are called the Superstition Mountains. And they're called the Superstition Mountains, I think, for a reason, because there's so many superstitions. There's a superstition that there's a pot of gold, but if you go find it, you'll die finding it because nobody's meant to find it. And there are lots of different superstitions. But this particular range of mountains was the range of mountains where the Apache made their, let's say, their last stand. When along we came, Lewis and Clark, and discovered everything, and then along came the American soldiers to claim the land, and anyway, such a sad time. And then and slowly and surely they let's say they vanquished the Native Americans, the Native American culture, as much as they could. And the Apache were always known as the warrior race. And now, if you want to argue with me on this point, by all means, go ahead. And if you've got comments to make, go ahead with it. I don't mind if someone wants to educate me, because I don't know everything about this. And also, if you want to give some little insights, that's okay as well. But the Apache were known as the fiercest and the most, let's say, the most cruel. It wasn't that they were the cruelest, it was that they were the toughest. They were the warrior race, fighting to the death for their beliefs and their culture. But they were looked down on because they had this fearsome nature and did fight to the death, which is, quite frankly, if somebody were trying to invade my home, I'd fight to the death. But they had this reputation, which in one way was well deserved, but in another misconstrued, I personally think. But they would hide out in the Superstition Mountains, and this is where they hid their women and where they hid their children. And if you Google it after the show, you can see that this is a whole range of mountains, and you know perfectly well that if somebody knows those mountains and knows the mountain range, you can hide in there forever and never be found if that's what you want. However, when the Apache finally retreated to the Superstition Mountains, and they hid in the mountains, and they hid their women and children in the mountains. And remember, with the Native American culture, it wasn't just the men who fought; it was the women and the children who also fought. But unfortunately, because of the fact that they had to hide there was a tremendous amount of starvation, and eventually as Grey Eagle might say, the white eye won, simply because they starved out the people. And so the women and the children and the old men who were left there were eventually starved, or they came out and they fought and were killed. And it's a sad story when we look at, it's a sad story when we look at every war, isn't it? But when we look at the way that we try to force, the Christians did the same thing. We try to force people into our belief. We try to force people into what we consider the right way to live. And and such arrogance. But anyway, so here I am now, however many years, at least 100 years later, knowing this history and knowing that this was where Grey Eagle lived, where his people lived, and where he lived and fought. So it was a very important thing for me to find my way to the mountain and to find the place where he had been. And I was there, I've been a few times, so I'm sort of going to kind of combine this story with 2 or 3 of the times that I went there. We had a great guide. We decided, because when I say we, I'm going to say my editor, but also my agent, I went with one time, and their experiences were similar. So I'm going to combine the stories. But we decided that we didn't have a car. We stayed at this very fancy Biltmore Hotel, which is smack in the middle of Phoenix, and we'd arranged for a driver who was also going to be our guide. Not that we needed a guide, we knew exactly where we wanted to go. Well, I did anyway, I knew exactly where I wanted to go, but still. So we're sitting there having coffee, waiting on this particular morning for our guide to come along, and my editor Joanne, all of a sudden I see her face change. Her eyes become very, very wide in her head, and she's looking past me. And then I hear a clink, 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 and I turn around, and this is tall guy. So tall, wearing full cowboy gear, big cowboy hat on. His hair is long and sort of braided down his back. He's wearing spurs, big cowboy boots, tight jeans. It looks brilliant. But my friend is from New York City, and she is a city girl. Now I'm a city girl, but I'm sort of, I'm used to different experiences, but she was not. And this poor girl almost had a heart attack when he headed towards us, and he said in this fantastic drawl, you Rosemary. And I laughed, and he said, I'm Lenny, and that was it. Instant connection between us. But my poor Joanne was like, really? Have I got to go with him? She was a little bit, nervous about the whole thing. We get in a Jeep, and he says, okay, ladies, where do you want to go? And I said, well, I actually want to go to the Superstition Mountains, and I want you to go this way. So he was surprised that I knew which way to go. And he was also surprised because as we're getting closer, I say to him, okay, I want you to just stop here, because we always stop at the trading post, and go here and here. And he realized, that maybe, even though I couldn't have driven there myself, didn't have the expertise to drive there myself, but I knew exactly where I was going. And the reason I knew exactly where I was going, because Grey Eagle and I were on a mission. So off we go. I tell him, keep going, and I finally tell him exactly where I want him to stop. We stop the car, we find a break in the fence, and we start hiking up in there. Now, I'm not a hiker, and anybody who knows me and my neighbour thinks I'm a frail little thing. I'm actually not so frail, but I do have back trouble, as most of you know. But anyway, so I'm wearing my walking boots. I'm set. I know exactly where I'm going, and so I say to Lenny, okay, I want to go up there, right up there. And there is sort of part way up the mountain, there's this enormous big flat rock that Grey Eagle led me to. And we keep hiking and hiking. My friend Joanne is lagging behind, and we keep going up and going up. And Lenny says to me at one point, you sure you know where you're going? Yes, I know where I'm going. This is what we're looking for. And suddenly there it was. So now Lenny knows enough by this time. He's heard some of the conversation. He knows that this is not his usual customer. I'm not just going just because because it's one of the things to do. I'm actually on a mission, and somehow he gets that. So as we get closer to the rock, he sort of stays back and he hangs back. So there Joanne and I were sitting on the rock, and Grey Eagle is with us, and I'm looking and I'm listening. And then Grey Eagle says to me, I'm going to tell you a story. Now, this had happened to me before with my agent, Joni. I'm going to tell you a story. And he began to tell us the story of his people. And he began to tell us of how his people hid in the Superstition Mountains. And he talked about how not just the Apache, and certainly not just the American people or the native nations. He began talking about people in every country in the world, and all about those who have died in every country in the world, have been waiting for a voice. They've been waiting for someone to be their voice. And he was talking to me about how this particular time we were there, this is the beginning, Rosemary. He said, this is the beginning. And he began to tell me about how those who are in the spirit world, they have no voice. Even if they were to rise up, they have no one to speak for them. And he was explaining how important it was that his people and all people have a voice and have someone who can speak for them. Now, I'm going to remind you that this is a while ago, quite a while ago, over 20 years ago. And we know mediumship now, don't we? We all know it. There are TV programs, there are TV shows. There was a TV show called The Medium. People talk about it freely now. But 20, 30 years ago, nobody really spoke of it. It was a taboo subject. And certainly, there were very, very few, if any, really good mediums around. When I say, in England, you could say there were some really great people, great mediums, but nobody that anyone could point to and say, she's the one, or he's the one, or it was a, let's say, a taboo subject. And we were, at this time that I was with Grey Eagle, we were on the cusp of the change, let's say the change of how things would be in the future, because there were no TV shows, there was nobody mentioning mediumship. I can remember a lovely lady, Elaine Louie, who was a reporter for the New York Times. She was sent to interview me because I was a phenomenon, and people were talking about me. She wanted, the paper said to her, go figure this out because we know this is fake. She left the interview having used at least 2 big boxes of tissues and knew perfectly well after that it wasn't a fake. And fortunately for me, she wrote of her experience and how it wasn't fake. But anyway, I'm digressing. So I'm trying to explain to you how in this day and age, when I was halfway up the mountain here, there was really nobody that anyone could point to say she talks to dead people or he talks to dead people and it's actually real. And there was nobody really, there was no personality at that time that people could relate to. And in the days of television, in the days of computers starting up and Facebook starting up, all those things starting up, there was nobody. It was almost a silent area that people just simply didn't go to. And so here I am with Grey Eagle, and we're on the cusp of something happening, something, let's say something big, something exciting. And he was explaining to me how his people, the people of the mountain, the people who were in the spirit world, how they were waiting and excited to rise up. And as he was telling this story, I started to hear singing in the mountains, at first distant sound, but then I started to hear drums, and the drums were beating, and then the chanting, and then the singing. And as I looked, all over the mountain. I could see people rising up on the mountain, and the singing and the chanting got louder, and the drums got louder and louder. And I was so busy with Grey Eagle, and I was so busy looking at this and so moved by this welcoming of me to the mountain. I was so moved by it, and I was quite startled when I heard a startled cry, and I turned, and my friend is looking at me. Tears are streaming down her face, and she's saying to me, is it real? Is it real what I'm seeing? Is it real what I'm hearing? And she too could hear the drums, and she too could hear the chanting and the singing, and she too could see, perhaps not as clearly as I, but she could see the people rising up on the mountain, excited, thrilled that their time, it seemed, was finally coming, that they would have a voice, that the spirit world would finally have a voice through me, through Grey Eagle. And it was just the most incredible and stunning experience, and my friend was sobbing, and Lenny was sitting off by himself, but you could see that he could hear and somewhat see, and he was mesmerized by what was happening. So it wasn't just me psychically seeing this stuff. People who had no talent, no psychic ability, nothing like that, were also being very much affected by this incredible and absolutely phenomenal experience that we're all having. Eventually, the chanting died down, and eventually everything calmed down, and eventually we came down from the mountain. But now I'm going to tell you the beginning of this story. Yes, I know, I started somewhere in the middle, didn't I? I'm going to tell you the beginning of this story. Of course, my lawnmower man is... Can you hear him in the background there, Chris? Sorry about this. It is a live show. There's not a lot I can do. I can get up and tell him to go away somewhere, but I'm not going to. You're going to have to put up with it. So here is the beginning of this story. We arrived at the foot of the mountain, and my friend was hot-footing along, running ahead of me, trying to find a break in the fence. And I knew we'd just got lots and lots of time, and Lenny was up ahead as well, and they were looking for a break in the fence. And they didn't seem to notice that there was a car parked by the side of the road. And they just went straight by it. Now, we're in the mountains. There are no cars. It's, you know, there's a roadway. So obviously we got there somehow. But there's no traffic going about, but there's this one lone car sitting by the side of the road, and as I'm sort of heading towards it, Joni and Lenny have gone hot foot ahead of me, and I noticed there are two women in this car, and as I got closer I realised that it was a mother and what I thought was a mother and daughter. And their windows were down, the windows were wound down, and so I stopped and I said hello and chatted to them for a little bit, and they told me, I said, have you been here before? And they said, we come every year. And the mother said, my husband, this was his favourite place, and he used to come here and he used to explore the Superstition Mountains all the time. And so once he died, and so once a year we come back, and we you know, this was like our little pilgrimage to honour him, and to because we know that if he's doing anything at all, he's going to be up in the mountains. And I reached into this lovely lady and I held her hands and I said, well, you know, I'm absolutely certain that your husband is still exploring those mountains, but I'm also absolutely certain that he's with you and he loves the fact that you come here. And she looked at me and she said, do you really think so? And I said, yes, I do. She said, so do you believe in life after death then? Remember, she had no clue who I was, and my first book hadn't been out yet. This was at the end of, this was around this time at the end of March or something that we were in. And I said, yes, I do. I really do believe that there is a life after death, and I really do believe that your husband is with you, and I think that he loves the fact that you both come here together to celebrate his life. And she's crying, and she's sort of, I hope you're right. I really do hope you're right. And I said, well, I said, you might find it helpful to read this book. It isn't actually published yet. You might be able to find it in the stores now, but its official publishing date is May 19th. So you might have to wait until next month to get it. So the daughter got out a pad and a pen, and she said, can you give me the name of the book? And I said, yes, of course I can. It's The Eagle and the Rose, and the author's name is Rosemary Althea. I didn't say who I was. And I have Grey Eagle standing behind me, and we were having a bit of a chuckle, because what most wonderful and fabulous way, the very, very first time ever that I've ever said to anyone, there's a book, The Eagle and the Rose. And it's the first time I ever was able to say, if you read it, I'm sure it will really help you. So it was very fitting that I was able to say that very first time, to recommend The Eagle and the Rose, that I was at the foot of the Superstition Mountains, and that I recommended that book to two ladies who had a very, very close affinity with those mountains also. It just seemed very, very fitting. So it was an amazing experience. I know people will think, really, you really heard, and there was really singing, and there was really chanting, and you could hear the drums, and yes, and we all heard them too. That's the end of my story. Chris, did you like that story?
Rosemary, I've heard that story a few different times from you over the years, and each time I feel like I go to a deeper level of understanding of what you said. I can tell from all the comments that are showing up online that everyone's touched. They're sending all kinds of hearts to you during, different portions of your story. They love your story.
Good. So let's have some comments and questions then, shall we?
Sure. I just wanted to let you know that you've got people on from Italy, France, Canada, Spain, Peru, and so many in the States. So they're all saying their hellos and sending their love.
Yay. Thank you. Thank you, all of you. I really do. I'm sorry about the lawnmower in the background, but I really do. If I stop him, he'll not come back, and then my lawn won't be done, and so on. So, yeah, and we're live, so these things happen. But I do want to say thank you to all of you, because, I so appreciate your following me. I so appreciate you enjoying my work, and I'm not sure whether to call you fans or not, but I feel that you're fans, and I'm a big fan of all of you too. So thank you for that. Keep going now, Chris. I'm not going to interrupt you anymore.
Well, Samantha and Reese are watching too.
Hi, my darling boy. Hi, Samantha. Hi, my darling boy. My darling Reese. Yeah, okay.
All right, so your friend, our friend Jeff from Maine, has left
Jeff.
a couple of comments that we can start with.
Okay, go.
All right, he says, the lack of true history lessons in schools, even today, is a way for the dominator culture to deny the true genocides that took place across this turtle continent, this place called USA. Naming the cultural erasure is one way to begin healing toward the native people who are survived in spite of us?
It is true, Jeff, and I so appreciate your comments, and I appreciate what you're saying, but it is not just, let's not just label the USA the bad guys, because when I look at, the Crusades, the English Crusades, and how they would tramp over everybody's feelings and faith, and when I look at all of the missionaries years ago that used to go out to Africa and force them to deny their own beliefs because, hey, we're right and you're wrong. When I look at you've only got to look at Hitler to see, but when you look at all of the wars that have been fought, and it goes back so many years, and the destruction that we cause as human beings, and now there's still destruction going on, and there's in the name of what? Hatred and meanness, and for goodness sake, people using the awful stuff that's going on right now, and people using that as an excuse to loot and to rob and to smash and to, again, it's sort of like we're promoting hatred. And I so wish that more of us who, more of us would stand up and say, we don't just want to talk about peace, we want to have peace. So, cut it out. And I just wish that more of us would. I was in trouble the other day, and I know I'm going to be in trouble today. I know there are those of you out there who think, and I understand why people are saying Black Lives Matter. Of course Black Lives Matter, but so does every life matter. Every life on this planet matters. My little puppy's life matters. I know it's a small thing, but when we start saying, when we start discriminating, or we start pointing out certain cultures or certain beliefs or certain races need more of our attention than others, that's when we get into these awful hatred things that are going on. And all lives matter. Tell me that they don't, please, and I will stand up there and I will argue with you. Of course Black lives matter, of course they do. White lives matter, of course they do. You think of every single person that has been put down for their beliefs, gay rights, any rights, everybody's rights. We can all get really angry about it, but rather than be angry about it, let's just support it with kindness and gentleness, and let that kindness and gentleness speak for itself. And I know there are those of you out there who think I'm naive, but I'm actually not naive at all, because there's no more strong truth than kindness, gentleness, and a massive dose of humility. And I do so wish that we'd all follow that rule. Chris, do you want to say anything about that before we go forward? I don't want to make this about political stuff, because it isn't. It's about humanity.
I do have a comment, Rosemary, and it's something that you've taught over the years so many times that I think honestly is if you'll call it the bottom brick of this all. You have said, we are spiritual beings having a human experience. That means we all come, if you will, from the same pot. And I think we've forgotten that we are all the same at the basis of everything. And it's the division, it's the forgetfulness of that as to why we have these issues.
Well, actually, what we're spiritual beings having a human experience. You can't. I mean, thank you, but that quote comes from Teilhard de Chardin. I should probably said it. No, I've said it right. And he says we are spiritual beings having a human experience. I take it a step further. We are spiritual beings having a human experience, but please, in a spiritual way. So we are spiritual beings having a human experience, but hopefully striving to do so in a spiritual way. So I take Teilhard de Chardin's comments, his quote, and add on to it, because I think it's so important that we should add on to it. And I do also want to say, I talked a little bit earlier about before The Eagle and the Rose came out, and of course there were mediums, many mediums, fabulous mediums before me. Sort of Estelle Roberts, for instance, and there's so many other people out there. We can go on and quote and quote and quote. Of course there were people before me, but what happened with The Eagle and the Rose was that I went on the Larry King show, woof, international, and fortunately for me, it sort of went on the New York Times bestseller list, and people were talking about it, and people all of a sudden realized, wow, it's okay. This is okay. We can talk about it now. I know that a couple of people are very, very kindly, a couple of fabulous mediums, very, very kindly on Twitter, just not so long ago said, wow, referring to me, wow, she's an icon. I've never been referred to an icon before. I thank you for that. But actually, sort of, it just takes one person to sort of have the courage to get out there and say that, and then everyone else can have the courage too. So we teach by our example. So can we teach by our example to be kind, to be nice? It is not naive, it is important, and that's where our true spiritual strength comes from. Yes, Chris.
So Jeff had the second part of that comment, which was, thank you for this message of worldwide respect for people as spiritual beings. This is the beginning of the answer for ending the racism that is prevalent today.
Absolutely.
People's fear of different cultures is the block.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just sort of racial issues. It's people have different beliefs than we have. For goodness sake, let people have their different beliefs. That doesn't mean that they're going to destroy yours. Be tolerant. Let's be tolerant. Let's be understanding. And for goodness sake, I'm going to say it again, let's be kind and gentle. And I will tell you what Grey Eagle says. And when his book comes out, Grey Eagle Speaks, you will see absolutely the one thing above and beyond anything else that he will say is, your world needs gentleness. Your world needs gentleness, and there is not nearly enough of it. So please be brave, all of you. Dare to be, and dare to be gentle, because through our gentleness is a strength that you wouldn't believe. Chris, let's have more comments and questions.
Yeah. Ivy's saying, thank you for telling an extraordinary story. Thank you. What a suiting story for this time.
Well, go on.
You changed my life, sending you healing and love.
Well, Ivy, look, thank you for that, darling. When I was on Instagram this morning, if you go to Instagram, I did say this story's for Ivy. So I did remember you, and thank you for saying what you did, and I do hope you enjoyed it, my darling. Yes.
Roxana wants to know,
hi, Roxana.
How come Grey Eagle got to be your guide? Are you friends from before, from another life? Were you also an American native once?
Oh, I'm just me. Does it matter? Yes, we knew. Yes, Roxanne, I can say that we did know each other previously. I always joke around with Grey Eagle because, I always like to sort of, not that this is necessarily true, but I always like to think that prior to my coming here, we had this discussion, is it your turn or is it my turn, He tells me it's always going to be my turn, which is fine. But I do laugh and I do wonder, poor Grey Eagle, I think, he got the short straw because he now has to deal with me all the time, and that's not easy. So, but thank you for that question. Yeah.
Maggie says, world history has been taken out of schools, and I see that as a huge discredit.
Yeah.
Not teaching what has occurred in the past and not to allow it to ever happen again.
Well, as I say, it's particularly concerning my childhood and my parents. When you go back in your history, the further back in the past you go, the further forward you dare to move, because you can learn so much, and we don't necessarily learn that war's a good thing and hey, let's get on with it. We learn how not to be. We can learn how not to be, as I have with my parents as an individual. We can learn how not to be as a town or a city. We can learn how not to be as a nation, and we can learn how not to be worldwide. And we know from our history, if you look back, I'm thinking of Hitler, Pol Pot, you name it, all of those people who went before, we know of the destruction and the maiming and the terror and the terrible destructive things that happened. And if we knew more about it, and if we were taught more about it in our history, we would learn how not to be. We would learn what was important, and what is important is to be tolerant and to allow other people to be who they want to be, providing nobody is trying to destroy you or your life, or because then you have to defend. I'm a warrior, so I'm going to defend. But I really think that if we had more education and educated our kids, I really think also that we shouldn't hold back on our education. We shouldn't try and protect our children by keeping from them the awful things that have happened to us. I think, in a given time and as they grow older, they should know what humanity is capable of, which is awful stuff. But I believe that humanity is also capable of wonders and of magic. That's what I believe. Chris?
Pat had two questions. Is Grey Eagle Apache, and when will Grey Eagle Speaks be available?
Yes, Grey Eagle. Thank you, Pat. Grey Eagle is Apache. I'm very proud of that fact. And also, when Grey Eagle Speaks will come out when I've gotten my butt off of my chair and gotten on with it. I have all of the material. I just need to put it now into book form. But when I gave it to, I remember years and years ago, I gave it to my agent to read, and she sat up night after night after night, and she said it was just like eating warm, melted, delicious chocolate, just reading through it. That was her take on it. So I promise it will be out. Maybe I'll try and get it out next year. We've only got 6 months to go till next year. You do know that, Chris, right? 6-7 months maybe.
I'm ready to help.
All right, great, good. I like it. All right, so it will be out soon. Keep checking. Yeah.
All right, so Cheryl's on.
Hi, Cheryl.
She says, Rosemary, what a beautiful breath of fresh air this has been today. She has a question. When a person commits suicide, do they go to heaven with their loved ones or some other place?
I remember I was in Italy. This is a story for another time. Just put down Italy, the theatre, and the suicide thing. There were so many people in Italy. I was a regular guest on this particular show, the Costanza show, the Maurizio Costanza show, and he was wonderful. I'd like to tell that story at some point, but it's funny. But I remember there was a priest on stage, I don't know, representing, perhaps some people thought representing the other side of what I represented, but actually we were in total agreement. But lots of churches, not just the Catholic Church, but there are lots of churches who will not allow people who take their own lives to be buried in consecrated ground. They think it's a wicked thing to do. They think, also there are lots of different attitudes. Here is my take on it, and trust me, I have spoken to so many people who've taken their own lives. When somebody takes their own life, it's because they are distressed, not because they're evil. It is because they are struggling, not because their life is perfectly fine. When somebody takes their own life, they don't, they're not to be condemned. They are to be guided, lifted, held, and helped. And that's exactly what happens when they go into the spirit world. They are lifted by their angels. They are helped. Because they are in the most deep distress. And so they are helped, and they are helped to heal. And they go to those in their family. We call it heaven, nirvana, well, it doesn't matter what you call it, does it? But they go to that place of light where those in their family who love them and who cherish them can lift them up and hold them and help them. Please don't anyone ever condemn somebody who does this, because this is an act of pure and absolute desperation. And the fact that any church or any body should deny somebody a place, whether it's to be buried or whatever it is, but to deny that somebody is, not a spiritual person because they do such a thing, it's a disgrace. It is a disgrace. Just, and often the judgment and the condemnation comes from people who have never been in a position where they've ever even thought. I can remember once years ago vacuuming my carpet and in my head writing a suicide note to my child. Yes, people, we all, those of us who go through stuff, we all feel that way sometimes. Luckily, thank goodness, most of us are able to handle it, or we have friends who help us to handle it, or for some reason we handle it. But look at all those people who are on medications and it creates all this confusion and heartache within them. Please don't judge, and please don't condemn. And yes, for all of you out there who have had this situation happen to them, please don't worry, because their angels help them. Their angels lift them and take them to that place of light where they are loved, held, and healed. Chris.
Nicole was saying about Grey Eagle Speaks that she would love to translate it into French.
Hey, Nicole, email me. Because when it comes out, we'd love to have people translating for us. Absolutely. Here's the thing though. When you're translating, it has to be word for word, because you cannot, and especially with this book, more so than any other of my books, especially with this book, it has to be as he says it, which is not so easy, I know, but that's the way it has to be. Okay, thank you for that though.
Roxana says, in Peru, the Incas were conquered by Spanish, and they mix with them in order to disappear the Inca race. But still, we have a great culture in the Andes, and the Queros are the descendants, very spiritual and wise healers.
Good. And it is amazing, isn't it? For all that humanity and its self-righteousness and its need to conquer and its need to destroy and so on, good always rises through. I mean, look at the Native American culture. Nobody really annihilated you, did they? You know, look at the Scots, look at the Brits. Well, I mean, I don't think there's a pure Briton on this planet today, because we're invaded by the Romans and the Saxons. And remember that, you know, the Brits we were taken over by the Vikings, the Romans, the Saxons, and all of that. And again and again, our island was pillaged, and the women were raped, and we were, you know, we now, as a nation, we have blue eyes and brown eyes and green eyes and you name it. I don't think we have, unfortunately, a pure Britain. If anybody out there knows of somebody who is a pure Briton, let me know, because I'd love to know that, but I don't think it's possible. Chris?
Roxana, Jeff, and Cheryl are all commenting on your answer about suicide. Roxana is saying it's so comforting to know. Jeff is saying thank you. And Cheryl's saying so the person does get the chance to be with their loved ones. This is awesome news.
Yes. Anyone who says to you, you know, they're floating around in nothingness and they're, you know, they're completely, no, absolutely do not believe it. And Jeff, my darling, I was thinking of you when I was talking, but we've had those conversations before. Keep going, Chris.
That's it for questions, Rosemary, and it is 12.
Oh, well, is that it then? Right then. Goodbye, everybody. It's all right. Well, I mean, we only keep going if we keep having the comments and so on. I know that you all want to just sit and listen to me, but this is the time when you do get an opportunity to ask a question. And once you're done with the questions and I'm done with my story, I mean, I do have a rack of lamb to I can see somebody's popping up here. I do have a rack of lamb to see to, and I do have to get ready for the beach. Not that I need to get ready for the beach. I'm just going just the way I am. But anyway, let me just do this then, and you can, I know there are people popping up here, so we'll have a few more minutes for that. But if you want to know more about what I'm up to or what we're doing, email me, rosemary@rosemaryaltea.com. Now, if you want us to get in touch with you when we're doing our online classes or online seminars or whatever it is we're doing, or if you want to know when Grey Eagle Speaks is coming out, for instance, if you want to know more about my other books and all the other stuff that's coming out, the new one is A Walk in the Clouds. If you want to know about all of that, or if you want to know about our guided meditations and all of that stuff, or anything at all, when you email us, please request to be put on the mailing list. It doesn't have to, you know, you don't have to pay anything. Just request to be put on there and we'll send you information. You'll only get notifications maybe 3 or 4 times a month, so it's once a week. We're not going to bombard you with stuff. I know that a lot of you don't share, so we're going to ask you please if you will share, because I think so many people love the subject and don't even know we're around. So share. For those of you who go to YouTube, whether it's to my cooking channel, whether it's to my whatever that is, the Spirit World Seesaw, I've forgotten it, but we are on YouTube, we do YouTube. I learned the other day that if you subscribe on YouTube, you don't have to pay anything to subscribe, but what happens is you will get a little notification that'll pop up as I'm going live or just before I'm going live, and it'll say Rosemary's live on YouTube. So it just reminds you. I mean, how good is that? Any other subject, when you email, if you could put the subject, whether you need healing, whether you want to know more about the books, whether you want to know about consultations, whatever it is. And yes, for all of you out there who ask again and again and again and email me over and over again, I do consultations. So if you want to know more, email me, rosemary@rosemaryaltea.com. And Michelle, my lovely assistant, who is not here with us today, busy somewhere else, but she will contact you and answer any questions you have. I know we have 1 or 2 more comments or questions, Chris. Do you want to give those to me?
Sure. Kayla's asking a question.
Hi, Kayla.
I have a baby 6 months old, but 5 years ago I had an abortion. I never knew the gender. Could you know if it was a she or a he? And also, where is my baby right now? Is she or he an angel in heaven?
I could just give you a really glib answer here, but I don't really want to, Kayla. But as we're almost out of time, I'll do the best I can. A boy, and I can know that it's a boy because Gregor is talking to me here, and growing, learning, and growing. I would love to talk to you more about that, but that's the best I can do for you right now, and I hope that helps you. What else have we got, Chris?
Just a lot of thank yous. Maggie says, your YouTube has a disclaimer of being over the age of 18, so it is not available to the general public to view.
Well, actually, I think that's only a couple. It's like when you go on there, it says over the age of 18, which it shouldn't be, but it asks you, is this program made for kids? And I always put no. But the disclaimer for over the 18 should not be on there. So thanks, Maggie, for letting me know that, and we'll correct that.
That's all.
And that's it, folks. That's all for now, folks. All right. So thank you. I'm going to thank my darling boy and my darling girl for joining in this morning. It's very likely that they've cut me off and got bored with all of this by now, but that's all right. It's lovely having them on. And Reese loves to just pop in for story time. So thank you all for joining me. And okay, on where will I be? Next Thursday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, I shall be doing another The Spirit World Sees All. Check in with Facebook on a regular basis, because I will be actually doing some little healing videos here and there whenever it is that I feel like it, when I've got a few spare minutes of time and so on. I'm just going to be popping in and out, so watch out for that. And I did say, if you'd like to email me, we'll answer every question that you can. The email, again, I'll give it out to you, rosemary@rosemaryaltea.com. We have not forgot about the competition. Please don't think I've forgotten about the competition, but Michelle is struggling right now. We've been struggling over the last few weeks. She's been struggling over the last few weeks, and especially this week. So, hopefully she'll be back on track next week, and we can get that sorted out. And then what else is there? And that's it. And then I shall see you again next week for another story time, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Next week, I think, now I might change my mind, but I think I'm going to tell you the story. And I know if Dean is listening, yes, you can read it in the book, but I would like to at some point definitely tell you the story of how I first began, and about my very first ever vision in public, which was quite sort of eerie and spooky, but fun. So join me next Saturday. You never know, I might change my mind on that story. We might tell something else, but I shall be back here next Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. In the meantime, everybody, thank you. You're all wonderful. I appreciate it. Have a very, very blessed rest of the day. Have an amazing solstice. I think the solstice is today, right? Have an amazing solstice, all of you out there who are celebrating. And happy Father's Day to all of you for tomorrow. All of you daddies who deserve it. Happy Father's Day for you. And have a very, very blessed rest of the day. Think of me, I'm at the beach today with my rack of lamb and watching the sunset. And have a very wonderful and a very blessed weekend, everybody. And I shall see you next week. Bye, everybody. Thank you, Chris.
You're welcome.